Warning. The following video contains scenes of graphic violence. Viewer discretion is advised.
So far, it seemed that the performance was well received. Luna and Celestia certainly seemed to have been absorbed by the story, their uncomfortable expressions melting away as the tale had unfurled. Starswirl was glad of the break, as it gave him a chance to see how others in the crowded hall were reacting. It was clear that the play was already something of a hit with the rest of the crowd, as there were many excited whispers shared about what had been seen in hushed tones, while a few other ponies attended to more urgent matters, such as visiting the garderobe. That seemed to be where Smart Cookie and Chancellor Puddinghead had wandered off to, or perhaps to purchase some festive concessions from the vendors out in the street. Princess Platinum was taking the chance to chat with Princess Luna. Though the two had something of a shaky first meeting, they had since become fast friends. The royal unicorn had even gone so far as to fill the castle of the Pony Sisters with many beautiful tapestries of exquisite quality. Starswirl had to admit he had not expected the Alicorn sisters and the mildly spoiled unicorn to get along so well, but he was relieved to see that they were getting along just fine. Commander Hurricane still sat as straight as ever, either unable or stubbornly refusing to relax, but there had been a certain wistfulness to his eyes as he had watched the play. Starswirl was almost certain he had seen the beginnings of a tear before they were quickly hidden by concealing feathers and an agitated sigh. It hurt Starswirl to see his friend like this, but he knew better than to try and talk to him now. It was better to let the Pegasus deal with his grief in his own way, rather than to force his own advice on him like some old fool, no matter how much he wanted to do just that. On the other hoof, there was the matter of his apprentice. Clover the Clever had sulked all throughout the performance, one of the few in the audience that did not laugh at the well-told jokes, or even so much as gasp at the more harrowing twists and turns. It was true she had lived through the events this performance pantomimed, but that was not enough to account for her sullen nature. No, Starswirl knew exactly what it was that occupied his star pupil's mind.
Is the play not to your liking, Clover? I thought the simulated Wendigos you crafted were rather impressive.
Starswirl hazarded, a brave sally that was met with a blank stare.
The spellwork must have been most intricate to shape simple ice art such convincing shapes.
Not really.
The dark circles around Clover's eyes told a troubled tale about just how much sleep she hadn't been getting lately.
Crafting convincing simulacra is easy when the particles are small enough.
She smiled bitterly.
Though even the short amount of work spent on this parlor trick seems like a heinous waste of our times and talents, as is this entire play, do I really need to stay here, Starswirl? I think there are far more important things we could be doing at the moment, and I'm sure you agree.
We've been over this, Clover,
said Starswirl, not unkindly.
A break could do us both some good. Even if you refuse to rest your body, you should at least rest your mind. I find at times when I'm stumped, it sometimes helps to take a step back from the problem and allow my mind to consider other matters. Or perhaps to consider nothing at all. Sometimes the answer to a dilemma will occur out of the blue, if you clear your mind. Obsessing like this isn't healthy.
Obsessing? You think I'm obsessing? We've been working for weeks, side by side, and we're still no closer to a solution. Why wouldn't I be obsessing when the lives of every pony in Equestria may be on the line?
Lower your voice, my apprentice,
rebuked the elder unicorn harshly, a flash of magic suffusing his eyes, uncharacteristically stern. Realizing that others were turning their heads toward the outburst, he mollified his tone, but continued in a hushed volume.
The crowd may be noisy, but there are still those who are near enough to overhear. Do you really want to risk causing a panic in this crowded theatre? I meant no offense to you. You are as dedicated as a true apprentice as an old fool like myself could ever hope for. But you must realize that you are not behaving like yourself.
Her response was icy.
Is that why you insisted I be here then? So you could tell me this in a crowded room where I wouldn't dare make a scene? I thought better of you.
No, Clover, I wanted you to be here so you could see what you once were. Yes, I admit this performance is mere frivolity, but it chronicles an important period, not only in Equestria's history, but your own. I had hoped that seeing this would remind you of who you are, of the special things you had and still have, despite what you've lost.
A susurrus of warning that the play was about to resume went out over the audience. There was a mild rush of the crowd to resume their seats, though the bustle of excitement seemed the furthest thing from Clover and Starswirl at that moment.
Your friends wouldn't want to see you this way, so absorbed in your work that you don't even have time to feel, to mourn. She most certainly wouldn't have wanted to see you ignore your own well-being for her sake.
Clover stared at the floor, her eyes hidden by her hood and the fringe of her mane. Even so, Starswirl thought he saw something glistening fall to the floor.
I know, okay? But there's nothing I can do for her now. I have to think of every pony else. We have to think of every pony else. I don't have time to selfishly fall apart, and it's wrong of you to suggest that I should. Every pony deals with these things in their own way. I know I might be distracting myself right now, but you have no right to tell me not to. I will grieve when this threat has been put to an end. In the meantime, if you have any more sage advice, I suggest that you start with Commander Hurricane. Unless you want a witch hunt on your hooves, that is.
The old unicorn was taken aback.
Whatever do you mean?
I forget sometimes. For all your wisdom, you're just as bad as I am when it comes to some things.
Clover spoke with something approaching a smirk.
You've had your head buried in that journal even more than I have, haven't you? How could any pony expect you to notice that the construction of Cloudsdale has been completely stalled? The Pegasi are busy with other matters these days, Starswirl, and there's only a skeleton crew tending to Equestria's weather. And this cold?
She turned puffy eyes up at her teacher.
It's not entirely their doing, I'm afraid.
Starswirl had no time to consider the ramifications of what his apprentice had said before the lights were lowered and the play resumed. He couldn't help but stare hard at Commander Hurricane as the curtains were drawn back and the actors took the stage. It was true that his friend had been hurt, perhaps worse than any pony else by what had happened, but surely he would not abandon his duty to pursue some personal vendetta. That was nothing like the loyal and dutiful Pegasus he had known. However, as the actor who played the role of Private Pansy took the stage, a look came over the commander's face that Starswirl had never seen before. It was there in a flash and gone in an instant, but it was unmistakable. It was a look less of wistfulness and more of intense regret, and perhaps more than a little longing. How much longer was she expected to live with this? She hated this creature, this Candy Mare, this thing that had pretended to be her daughter. It delighted in slaughtering children, in causing suffering and pain. She would destroy it if she could, but so far she could not think of any way in which it could be done. What could you do to Candy to hurt it? Eat it? You would just suffer the same fate as that poor little colt, turned into a candy monstrosity, destined to be devoured by the original at best, or, worse, used as a freakish puppet for her amusement. Burn it? She watched as bits of the Candy Mare's melted licorice hair rolled across the floor to rejoin its mistress. No, she had thought of every possible way she could to put an end to this living nightmare and come up with nothing even remotely worth trying. Honestly, she could not fathom why the monster did not simply devour her like all the others. Instead, she did horrible things like this. The table was set for two, but the Candy Mare's plate was already empty, save for smears of fresh blood. Her own, of course, was still full. She knew that she could not keep stalling. She could see it in the Candy Mare's eyes as they leered at her from beneath her writhing mane. She was expected to eat. If she didn't soon, the cruel creature would force her. The little filly was still alive, if you could call her sorry state a form of life. Bits and pieces of her squirmed energetically on the dinner plate, her charred body having been skillfully chopped up and served wriggling in a gravy made from her own boiling blood. The Candy Mare had made sure to carve off a large hunk of the living dead pony's flank, pink juices seeping from the steaming flesh, threatening to spill over the thin plate.
Eat up. It's getting colder outside. You need it to keep up your strength. This little filly, bathed in the flames of 1,000 souls, has been imbued a proportion of my life force. It should be enough to give you back a little of the health you've lost trying to starve yourself to death.
She had refused to eat for days now. It had not been the first time. She had tried to just die, to succumb to hunger so many times, but the Candy Mare would not let her. She didn't know how many times she had tried, but her body was starting to rebel. The hunger pains and the delirium they brought were beginning to weigh heavily on the old mare. Though a bit of the little girl squirmed on the end of her fork, she couldn't bring the morsel of flesh to her lips. Heaven help her, the horrid meat did smell good. It had all smelled good when it was served to her in steaming bowls of stew. Why had she not realized back then what she had been doing? The Candy Mare had not let her leave the cottage in weeks, only leaving her alone long enough to go out and lure back more meat for their larder. This was not the first child served like this to her on a silver platter.
Why do you keep doing this? You know I don't want to eat this. You know it's repulsive, that it sickens me, that I hate it, that I hate you.
Yes, but that's only because you haven't given it a chance.
The fiend grinned.
I didn't think I would like it either, but the taste grew on me in time. I was tricked the first time I ever ate any pony, you know? I have to say, the flavor isn't that different raw or cooked, but the texture varies quite significantly.
At that, the Candy Mare took a delicate bite of a portion of the charred filly's shoulder. Gretel's decapitated head sat eyeless with a candy apple jammed in her mouth. She moaned softly around the bright red fruit, charred lips pulled back over her teeth, still steaming. It was hard to tell if the unearthly sound was one of pain or pleasure, or even, perhaps, both. The old mare did not care to speculate. She kept hoping that insanity would grip her mind and leave her insensible to all the horror around her. Sadly, she had remained stubbornly sane.
You're a monster!
And you're just a helpless old mare starving to death in the heart of an unending winter!
The Candy Mare slammed her hooves into the table.
How many years has it been now? How many more will it be before you finally accept that I'm the only one who cares if you survive? The unicorns have abandoned this land. The Pegasi and other Earth ponies too. There's no one who can save you but me.
You know why?
Mother, why won't you let me just take care of you?
I am not your mother. You're the reason they disappeared. My husband. My little girl. I figured it out. It was you. You're the one that made them disappear.
You're so sure of that, are you?
Chuckled the Candy Mare, though from the expression on her sugar-dusted face, it did not seem like she thought it was very funny.
Every pony knows you're responsible for the disappearances at the castle town. Just tell me, what happened to them? Did you kill them? Did you eat them?
The old mare paused, hoping against hope that somehow they had been spared that misery. Sadly, she could not doubt such a fate.
I wouldn't be surprised. Or did they escape you? Did you leave them cowering in some hole somewhere for a late night snack? Just tell me, what happened to Cabbage and Pumpkin Patch?
The Candy Mare's eyes flickered, and the life seemed to fade from her. Her mane hung limp from her sugar skull, and she did not so much as twitch. Piece by piece, the candy that coated the cottage was stripped away, flowing back into her body. Soon, the kitchen was dark and lonely, the only light coming from the banked embers in the very normal-looking stove. With the candy coating now removed, the old mare could see the sticky blood that coated every surface, though if it belonged to the Candy Mare or to the innocents she had slaughtered, it was impossible to say. Even the light from the kitchen window was washed a crimson hue, as the fading light outside just barely managed to seep through the scarlet stains. The red glow spread over the monster that sat shivering at the dinner table, as bit by bit the candy that composed her body turned within. This was not anything the old mare had ever seen her do before. As the candy continued to peel away, she could see tiny misshapen hooves, pale skin stretched over a bony form, and a listless red mane that hung in greasy strips from a tiny, shrunken skull. Her eyes, bright green and almost glowing in the dying light from the window, turned to the old mare and made her breath catch in her throat. This could not be.
You want to know what happened to me and Daddy so badly?
Whispered the broken child sadly.
Fine. I'll tell you, Mama. We went to the castle town. It was everything I had ever imagined. But the pony Daddy and I were supposed to meet, he was very, very bad. He took me away from Daddy and forced me to do things I'd rather not talk about. One of the things that I'd rather not talk about is him forcing me to eat Daddy. He had killed him and left him in a rotting midden heap like a dead dog. But that didn't stop him from carving Daddy up and serving him to me.
Her eyes flickered again, candy-swirled madness threatening to crawl back into them. She shook herself and continued.
He had done so many horrible things to me. He rotted my teeth, he rotted my mind, he rotted my body. But being tricked into eating Daddy, that was too much for me to take. Do you want to know what the worst part is? He didn't taste half bad. I was so ashamed, because compared to everything else I had been forced to do, eating pony flesh, even that of my father, was actually enjoyable. I liked it. I liked it a lot.
A deep, terrifying groan rose from the old timbers of the rotting cottage. At first, the old mare thought the house was on the verge of collapsing, before she realized that the sound was coming from her own mouth. Her mind was frozen. She did not want to believe, did not want to think it was true. But the evidence sat shivering right in front of her, bereft of the bright-coloured mantle it wore to conceal itself from the rest of the world. Her husband had died cruelly, but that was merciful compared to her daughter's fate.
I got a taste for it then. And, as you know, Daddy was only the first pony I ate. That bad unicorn kept pushing me, experimenting on me, trying to break me. But I was already broken. So, I ate. I ate, and I ate to grow strong. The more I ate, the stronger I got. And then I ate that pitiful, rancid little unicorn's life. But I couldn't stop there, Mother. You were right. The unicorns don't care about us. The Pegasi wouldn't defend us. And our fellow Earth ponies were content to turn a blind eye to all the injustice that we suffered instead of trying to help us, or even help themselves. So tell me, Mother, why not kill them? Why not eat them too? Why not grow strong off the lives of all those terrible ponies? Why should we suffer in the cold and the dark when we can live and live and live and live to kill them all? We can make them suffer the same way we were made to suffer.
Candy and light flooded the cottage again as the sugar coating crept back out of her daughter's dead form and engulfed the room. Warmth and sweet scents and terrible laughter assaulted the old mare from all sides. The Candy Mare's fragile body, sheathed in sweets once more, rose from where she had been sitting and came to her mother's side. Her daughter came to her side. The smile on her little girl's new face was at once predatory and pleading.
You see now, don't you, Mother? We have to eat to grow strong. We have to make them pay for everything they've done to us. I know what the unicorns did to Grandma. How you came to hate them for having forced you on her, for making her bear the bastard daughter of the master of the house. You were right to hate them. And it's that hatred that will make you strong. The more I feed you, the more you eat, and very soon, you'll be just like me.
Those last words froze the blood in the old mare's heart. The moan in her throat turned into a rattling rasp as all the air left her lungs. The decapitated head on the serving plate seemed to look up at her with blind pity. Even without eyes, the dead could see just how terrible the fate that her own daughter had planned out for her truly was. It was true, she had always hated the unicorns and Pegasi, but each of the tribes had hated the others. It had always been that way. Though her daughter had been sweet and innocent, it was that hatred that had helped poison and twist her, that had helped to shape her into the creature she was now. She was her mother's daughter, after all, and the sick irony was not lost on Strawberry Patch. A sharp stab in her chest, a wave of panic, and then a sigh of relief. This revelation had been too much for the old pony's heart to take. She slumped forward in her chair.
Mother?
The candy-coated filly nuzzled her mother's side.
Mother, the food's getting cold. This is no time to nap. Please, didn't you hear what I said before? You have to live, so you have to eat. You have to. Mother? Mother?
A distant wail cut through the snowy stillness, causing Private Pansy to shiver. Though the storm had raged for the better part of a day and a night now, it was beginning to slacken. Commander Hurricane had charged this platoon of Pegasi with the evacuation effort, and storm or no storm, they would do their duty. Though they had been able to subdue the Wendigos in the newfound nation of Equestria, they seemed to be far too numerous and powerful here in the northern farmlands to drive away completely. Private Pansy did not really want to think about what that must mean about the hatred and distrust the simple farm folk must feel for the other pony tribes. She was only here to observe the proceedings on the commander's orders and to remind the other troops that they were supposed to treat the earth ponies with kindness, tolerance, and friendship when possible. It had been hard enough convincing the earth ponies they could trust the Pegasus platoon. The only interaction many of them had ever had with a Pegasus before were the sometimes harsh negotiations over weather and crop yields. Private Pansy had thought many times before the Troubles that it seemed rather silly to threaten to restrict the farmers' ability to grow food unless they provided a large share of that selfsame food supply to the Pegasi. Obviously, they had no choice but to comply. But what if they hadn't? What if they had all refused to share any food, or even to grow it, so long as the Pegasi made such demands? They would have all starved. It really wasn't any wonder the Wendigos had come to bedevil the pony tribes. Thinking about it, it was no surprise they'd been thickest around the ponies who had been the most downtrodden, who had the most reason to hate the other tribes. It made Pansy's heart ache if she thought about it too much. Still, such thoughts put things in perspective when, during a particularly nasty squall, the troop had approached a small wagon to render aid, and their diving out of the air had caused the simple farmers to respond with panic. While it was true that visibility was poor, once they established that they were no threat, the earth ponies had still been very angry and distraught. Apparently, in the commotion, their children had run away to escape the perceived threat, and now had likely become lost in the forest. They had been searching for a night and the better part of the next day, trying to find the lost tots and reunite them with their parents. Many of the Pegasi soldiers were grumbling that the whole thing was a farce, and that there were no children, and this was just a wild goose chase, the earth pony's idea of a joke. Private Pansy, for her part, felt that the parents' distress was genuine. No one would cry as they had in this cold if they could keep from it, lest they lose part of their face to frostbite. Lost in her thoughts, Private Pansy had found herself wandering away from the rest of the platoon and deeper into the darkening woods. Another wail cut through the frosty forest. Though it sounded no less unearthly than before, this time it was followed swiftly by a new sound. The distant, warbling sobs of a crying child. It must be the little lost children, Pansy thought to herself. But how did they manage to get so far away from the road in this storm? She had better call the others. But when she tried to retrace her steps, she found that no other Pegasi were nearby. Flying above the forest canopy did no good either, as, though the storm had slackened, visibility was still poor above the tree line. For better or worse, Private Pansy would have to rescue the children on her own. Stealing what courage she could muster, the slight Pegasus pressed deeper into the forest until she came to a wide clearing. Everything was coated in thick, ancient snowdrifts, save for a distant, dilapidated farmhouse. That struck Pansy as odd, given how the storm had raged before. Even a truly industrious pony would not have been able to clear off a cottage of even this small size without constant vigilance. Given the abandoned and dishevelled appearance of the warped timbers, it was unlikely any pony had cared for the house in some time. Even so, there it was again, the distant sounds of children weeping caught on a gust of frigid wind. It wasn't so distant anymore. She flew over the crust of snow and landed in front of the cabin door. Sure enough, she could hear the crying, slightly muffled, just on the other side of the door. Not wanting to startle any pony, she politely knocked.
Hello? Pegasus Patrol? Any pony home? Hello? Are you okay in there?
A thought crossed Pansy's mind about abandoned shacks and crying children. She banged louder this time.
I warn you, if you hurt any pony, it will go easier for you if you give up yourself peacefully.
There was no answer. Even the sobs seemed to have paused before resuming their steady cadence. Pansy reached out to knock again and was surprised when the door creaked open under her hoof. Inside, the farmhouse was cold and just as ramshackle as the outside. Knickknacks and other bric-a-brac cluttered broken and stained furniture. Here and there, the remnants of a picture frame still hung on the wall, though whatever scene the frames once held seemed to have been torn to shreds long ago. The peeling wallpaper and dusty floor were covered here and there with dark, unidentifiable stains that Pansy did not want to think about. The place smelled awful. She found herself suddenly wishing she had tried harder to find the rest of the platoon. Maybe the best course of action was to step back outside the cottage door and go get some backup. After all, who knew how many ponies could be lurking in the murky depths of the farmhouse? Who knew what they might do to Pansy if they caught her? A sudden, heartbreaking wail made Pansy's decision for her. Without hesitation, she bounded down the hallway and into what seemed like it had once been a kitchen. It was hard to tell under all the blood. Floor to ceiling, wall to wall, the entire room seemed to be drenched in blood, both old and new. Even the windows were soaked, lending a sanguine light to the room from the fitful illumination outside. The rancid, rotting scent hit Pansy like a punch to the nose, making her gag and her eyes water. There were still bits and pieces of something wriggling in the scarlet mess. Bizarrely, there was a table, perfectly set for two, with knives and forks neatly arranged around bloody serving dishes and plates. Only this table seemed to have remained untouched by whatever had happened in this room. The table and the tiny sobbing form that was curled up beneath it.
Mama! Mama!
Hello? Are you okay?
Pansy tried not to gag.
Are you Gretel or Hansel? Your parents are worried sick about you. They've sent me to bring you home.
The crying only increased, soft sobs giving way to wails once more.
Shh. Hey, I don't know what happened, but we should get you out of here. There's no telling when the ponies who own this place might be back. We need to hurry.
I lost her. I lost Mama.
It's okay. I can get you back to your mother. Everything is going to be fine.
No, it's not!
Screamed the child as its head twisted all the way around to glare at Pansy with blazing hot eye sockets. Thick red tendrils, like writhing worms, spilled out from the eyeless void, reaching toward the startled Pegasus. Only her military training kept her from being snatched by the grasping crimson tethers.
Nothing will ever be fine again!
Exploded the filly, howling in many voices. Her tiny body ripped and tore as something burst forth from within, shredding to pieces the rotten and dead corpse of a little filly from inside out. A sugary scent mixed with the stench of rotting meat and putrefied blood filled the room as a grown mare made of candy flipped the table and sent it shattering to splinters against the wall.
My father, my mother, they both abandoned me. Left me in this rotten world with all these rotten people. I tried to be a good person. I tried to protect her, but she died just the same. Just like everyone else in this filthy, rotten world.
Rainbow-colored tears gathered at the corners of the creature's lollipop eyes.
Everyone except me.
Pansy was frozen in place. The torrents of sheer madness and despair rolling off this creature shook her to her very core. She had heard rumors of the Candy Mare, of course, but like most Pegasi, she had dismissed it as some kind of earth pony urban legend, a way of explaining away loved ones lost in the cold. She had always hoped it was ponies leaving for warmer climates or, at worst, becoming tragically lost in a sudden whiteout. She had never considered that such a blood-soaked monstrosity could really be at the heart of the Nightmare Night legend. The beast seemed to be occupied with her own grief. If Pansy was careful, she might just be able to go back out of the kitchen, out of the house, out of the forest, and out of this country forever. One hind hoof moved to do just that, and landed on a floorboard with a traitorous creak.
It's because of ponies. Like you. Pegasi and unicorns. Pegasi and unicorns.
You all think you're so much better than everyone else. But I have a secret for you.
With blinding speed, the fiend slithered across the floor to stand right beside Pansy. She leaned in, sugary breath, hot and sweet, in Pansy's ear and nose.
You all taste the same.
Sharp teeth clipped Pansy's ear off at the root, leaving a bloody hole in the side of her head. She did not even register the pain, transfixed by the sight of the Candy Mare slowly chewing the wad of flesh. It was not until her own blood dribbled down the side of her face and into the corner of her own mouth that she screamed in shock and pain. She reeled backwards. She had to get away. She ran down the hallway, knocking over dusty end tables and chairs, trying to block the candy monster's pursuit. She need not have bothered. When she reached the living room, the sugar-coated nightmare was waiting for her with a bloody grin, blocking the door. Without hesitation, Pansy whirled and ran back the way she had come. There was another door. She had seen it in the kitchen. She did not know how the Candy Mare had beaten her to the living room, but right now, that was the only other way out. The floor itself seemed to conspire against her, turning sticky and gooey beneath her hooves. With a surge of her wings, she pulled herself loose, only to see that it was not just the floor, but the walls and ceiling as well that seemed to be melting around her. She had to land again, or run the risk of being crushed. Barely making it back to the blood-stained kitchen once again, she froze dead in her tracks. There was a pony in a chair, but it was not the Candy Mare. She looked old, haggard, and, from the glaze of her milky eyes, very dead. Had she been sitting at the table the entire time? Something caught Pansy's eye. A book that poked from the ruffles of the dead pony's dress. Despite her peril, the book seemed somehow important to Pansy, as if it were calling out to her. She reached out. Just as she laid a single hoof upon it, a riot of laughter shook the cottage. The walls seemed to stretch and melt all around her, like the images in a funhouse mirror. Without warning, the kitchen floor fell away, opening like a massive mouth, splintered timbers serving as the jagged fangs of the gaping maw. There was no time to react. Pansy tumbled into the darkness, sure that at any moment she was going to crack her skull or break her spine. Instead, she had an unexpectedly gentle landing. The dank basement she had fallen into was without illumination, so before her eyes could adjust, the first thing to assault her was the stench. It was the same rotting scent she had smelled before, only now it rose up and surrounded her. It was strange and spicy, salty almost, terribly bitter and foul. As her eyes adjusted to the gloom, she could see why. The cellar was full of dead bodies. Fillies and foals mostly, though a few colts and stallions hung from hooks on the walls. More corpses were scattered at her hooves. These, apparently, had been responsible for her soft landing. Pansy recoiled in terror. She had been a seasoned veteran for many years now, though she had intentionally avoided any promotion in rank, afraid of the responsibility and preferring her role as Commander Hurricane's liaison and confidant. Yet never, in all her years, in all the battles that she had witnessed, had she seen so many corpses in one place. The empty eye sockets of preserved skulls gazed up at her piteously. She could see where some ponies had been pickled and others coated in salt to preserve their flesh. Pansy realized with a lurch in her stomach that she had landed in the monster's larder. As if conjured by that thought, the Candy Mare appeared, a high-pitched giggle bubbling from her sugar-frosted lips. The snake-like whips that served as her mane raised knives, cleavers, and other carving implements that glittered cruelly in the dark. Pansy had no doubt that those blades were razor-honed. She saw now what fate lay in store for her. There was a row of jars filled with delicate Pegasus wings in some kind of sauce. Next to them were other organs, pieces of pony flesh, far more disgusting to behold, but she could not take her eyes off those plucked appendages in their jars. She did not want parts of her body to be coated in spices and eaten as a snack when she died.
Wait! Just wait! You don't have to do this! I swear, I won't tell anyone about it. You can just keep killing everyone. ponies are here, that's what we want. I'll make sure nobody comes to bother you. I've got friends in high places and can't walk. We're banning this region anyway, so they're left behind are liable to be bandits, rogues, or hate mongers. Anyway, if you let me go, I'm sure I can make the authorities look the other way.
No.
From the grin on her face and the glazed look in her glacé eyes, it did not seem like the Candy Mare was listening. The parts of the knives that weren't splattered with dark stains glistened in the dusky light.
Please don't kill me.
Pansy howled in desperation as she lifted the book high as a shield. She trembled, expecting to feel the cold kiss of serrated metal at any moment. It was a sensation that never came.
No, I think I have a better idea.
A single tendril reached out and wrested the book from Pansy's shaking grasp.
You will be my emissary. You will tell my story. That way, all will know what is coming for them. You will be my messenger, so that all will know exactly what waits for them in the dark.
The Candy Mare tucked the book into Pansy's saddlebag.
Really? Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I promise I'll do exactly as you say.
Pansy looked around. There did not seem to be any way out of this terrible charnel cellar. She did not trust the way that the Candy Mare smiled at her.
Only, how do I know this isn't just some trick? That I can trust you? That I'm not just leading you to more victims?
The Candy Mare grinned wider as a hole opened up in the roof high above. At that moment, the cold light spilling through this new skylight was the most welcome sight that Pansy had ever seen.
You'll just have to decide that for yourself. Did I deceive you? Or indulge you? Trick